At 2 in the morning, I found myself scrutinizing a late-night email from my forensic accountant at my kitchen table. The spreadsheet, illuminated by the computer screen, reorganized 6 years of my life into an unfamiliar pattern. Nathan Reeves, 44 years old, had been under the impression that I was in a steady marriage with a woman who held similar views on finances, family, and our future. I assumed we were working towards shared objectives as partners. However, my belief in her love for me, sleeping upstairs, was misplaced. I'd been deceived, but my brain had accumulated evidence long before my heart was ready to acknowledge the truth. Let me guide you through the origins of my suspicion, not of my marriage, but of its deceitful undertones. Elaine and I first crossed paths at a corporate leadership conference in 2012. She ascended in the finance department at Wexford Industrial, a mid-sized manufacturing company based in Columbus, Ohio. Simultaneously, I managed my own consultancy firm focusing on supply chain efficiency. Both of us shared ambition and fiscal prudence, having grown up in families where financial security was not an inherent certainty. This aspect resonated deeply with me, as my father lost employment when I was 14, leading to 3 years of unemployment. I observed my mother selling her valuables, multiple house moves, and eventually staying at my grandmother's home. Experiences such as these left lasting scars. They molded me into someone who meticulously monitors finances, maintains emergency funds, and never takes stability for granted. Upon learning about Elaine's upbringing with a single mother working multiple nursing shifts, I felt connected to a kindred spirit. Someone who would approach our collaborative endeavors thoughtfully and judiciously. We wed in 2014. Opted for a low-key wedding and scaled-down reception in 2015, as we both deemed it unnecessary to spend $30,000 on a celebration when it could be used instead for purchasing a house. Practicality and long-term goals were our focus. In that year, we acquired a 3-bedroom property in a good school district. Our daughter Chloe was born in 2016, followed by son Martin in 2018. We opted for economical vehicles. I drove a 5-year-old truck and she owned a used Honda Civic. Our holidays were kept simple. We consistently saved for retirement and tried to do everything right, or so I believed. The first sign of trouble emerged in 2020. Sitting at our dining table, we reviewed our monthly budget, a routine we'd followed since our engagement. When Elaine discussed her company freezing bonuses because of the pandemic, I recall offering a sympathetic nod. Her annual base salary stood at approximately $145,000, but her yearly bonus, subject to company performance and market conditions, was unpredictable, ranging from $10,000 to $20,000. She would casually mention its uncertainty and quickly shift the conversation towards saving money for emergencies, suggesting we delay the kids' summer camp. I agreed, considering it a responsible decision for partners. Unbeknownst to me at that time, her company hadn't frozen bonuses. Instead, she had received $127,000 in performance bonuses that year alone. Every penny was channeled into areas I wouldn't have considered. The insidious reduction of funds occurred so gradually that I couldn't perceive it. This is the essence of gaslighting. The sensation of manipulation was absent. It seemed as though we were merely facing reality. Over a span of 3 years, our discussions on finances followed a consistent course. Elaine would voice worries about our expenditures and propose cost reductions. My gym membership, my business trips, the children's extracurricular activities. She portrayed herself as the prudent one, the cautious one, the one shielding us from financial catastrophe. And I agreed, not due to weakness, but because I trusted her. Because the financial data she presented during our monthly reviews appeared to validate her claims. When your spouse claims that finances are tighter than they appear, you seldom suspect dishonesty. I abandoned my gym membership and took up outdoor running instead. I reduced my business travel by 40%, opting for virtual meetings. We withdrew Chloe from dance class and informed Martin he'd have to wait another year for hockey. Each decision seemed rational at the time. Every act of sacrifice seemed mutual. What I didn't realize was that while I was struggling to save $40 monthly by running in the rain, my wife was accumulating a substantial wealth independent of me. The downfall started with an insignificant issue. It usually does. In January 2024, I received a letter from the IRS, not a notice for an audit, but rather a query about the income reported on our joint tax return compared to the income listed by Elaine's employer on her W-2. Initially, I was not concerned. Tax documents occasionally have errors with numbers. I thought it was a mere clerical error. I brought it up with Elaine that evening, expecting her to dismissively tell me she would call HR to rectify the issue. Instead, she paled. She quickly regained composure. I'll give her credit for that. Within seconds, she assured me it was likely just a coding mistake and she would take care of it. However, I saw her expression at that moment. I saw the fleeting look of something that appeared to be fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I continued pondering over her expression, convincing myself it was my imagination. Considering our 10 years of marriage, I chose to give her the benefit of the doubt. Yet I found it necessary to check our tax records on my laptop. Examining our joint return from last year, I scrutinized the income figures she had entered. I then sought out her W-2, but it wasn't in our shared folder. This realization struck me that I had never seen my wife's W-2 before. Every year, she had handled entering the information herself, citing her company's compensation structure as the reason for her handling it alone. I had never questioned this. Why should I question my wife? But now I did. So the following morning, I asked Elaine for a copy of her W-2 to address an IRS inquiry. My request was straightforward and reasonable. She responded that her company was transitioning to a new payroll system and the documents were temporarily unavailable. I said I'd wait. 2 weeks passed and she informed me the change was taking longer than anticipated. I agreed to wait longer. A month subsequently, she disclosed she would manage the IRS inquiry personally, and there was no need for my concern. At this point, I recognized my knowledge was not as comprehensive as I thought. I was unaware of the extent, workings, or depth of the situation unfolding. However, I sensed something amiss. I suspected my wife concealed aspects regarding her income. Unable to challenge her until I comprehended the issue at hand, I undertook an action I hadn't envisioned myself doing. I began investigating my spouse. The first person I contacted was my former university roommate, Owen. Having ventured into law post-graduation and specializing in corporate litigation rather than family law, he still knew individuals who knew others. I asked for a recommendation for someone discreet, someone adept at financial forensics. Without further queries, Owen offered me Malcolm Yates' name. For 2 decades, Malcolm served at the FBI, focusing on financial crimes. His forte was uncovering funds that others aimed to conceal. He set his rate at $400 per hour, demanded an initial fee of $10,000, and maintained a waiting list of 6 weeks. I covered the retainer from my business account, labeling it as a consulting expense. I confided in no one, not even my sister Audrey, closest friends, or anyone who might unintentionally reveal it to Elaine. For the first time in my marriage, I harbored secrets. The experience was wretched, yet indispensable. Malcolm and I met for the first time in early March. In his 60s, he bore the weary eyes of one who had witnessed every form of human duplicity. He listened to my account without interruption, jotting down notes in a small, worn leather notebook that appeared to have endured decades of grim tidings. Upon concluding my narrative, he posed a question I hadn't anticipated. "What are you seeking?" I failed to grasp his meaning. "Are you hoping I won't discover anything?" he inquired. "Is it your expectation that your wife's incompetent with paperwork and this is all just a mix-up? You have clients who desire proof of their suspicions and those who wish for disproof, shaping how information is presented." After pondering it for some time, I replied, "I seek the truth." He had heard that answer before, knowing its typical implications, and he responded, "Then we'll begin with the tax records. I'll require you to sign authorization forms and please be patient. This type of work requires time." I signed the papers and vowed patience, returning home to my wife and children, feigning no change. 6 weeks later, the first report arrived via email from Malcolm. "Initial findings Reeves matter," with a PDF attachment labeled with a case number. I remained seated for an extended period before I opened it, allowing the sun to traverse my desk and prompting Elaine to inform me dinner was prepared. I feigned a busy work schedule to postpone eating, and she acquiesced without suspicion due to lack of reason for doubt. That's the nature of trust. It flows in both directions. After her departure, I perused the PDF document. The initial page provided an overview, disclosing 3 figures that would significantly alter my perspective on my marriage. The first figure, $891,247, represented the total amount of performance bonuses Elaine had received from Wexford Industrial between 2018 and 2024. The second figure, $0, was the proportion of those bonuses that surfaced in any of our shared or personal accounts accessible to me. The third figure, $847,000, corresponded to funds traced to Dollars Thornton, Elaine's mother's accounts. I read these numbers 3 times over. Upon reviewing the comprehensive account of transactions, I found myself going through page after page of bank transfers, deposited checks, and wire transactions, all dated and documented. Each transaction was another piece of proof that my spouse had been embezzling from our marriage for 6 years. The extent of it was astounding. Every year, my wife excelled in her department and received substantial bonuses, sometimes surpassing her base salary. Yet she concealed every penny from me while simultaneously lecturing me about fiscal prudence. The process was almost admirable in its simplicity. My wife had established a separate checking account at a bank we didn't use, one linked to her work email address. Her bonuses were directly deposited there. Then, via a series of Zelle transfers, Venmo payments, and traditional checks, she moved the money to her mother's accounts. However, Dollars wasn't using this money either. Over the course of our marriage, my wife Elaine secretly amassed approximately $1 million, undisclosed to me, as Malcolm's investigation revealed, sitting in a brokerage account under her name. The balance, including investment returns, stood at over $920,000. As I pondered over this revelation, I recalled every cutback I made, canceled gym memberships, turned down business opportunities, and countless times we told our children we couldn't afford something due to responsibility, all of which were untrue. In the following week, Malcolm and I discussed his findings at length. He presented a detailed paper trail he had compiled, consisting of bank statements, transaction records, tax documents that highlighted an inconsistency between what Elaine reported to the IRS and her employer's reports. The significant point was, she had been underreporting her income on our joint tax returns for years. Not only did she conceal this money, but she also committed tax fraud by doing so. Malcolm clarified that this provides various choices. In case of divorce court proceedings, concealed assets become crucial in any settlement. If you wish to delve deeper, the tax fraud aspect could lead to criminal charges against her. I inquired about his advice. He responded it wasn't within his purview. You require a family law attorney for the divorce aspect and should discuss IRS implications with a tax expert. I can provide referrals. I utilized the referrals. I returned home, dined with my wife and children as if nothing was amiss. I then stayed awake until 4 a.m., contemplating how I arrived at this juncture. The ensuing 2 months were an ordeal of calculated deceit. I sought counsel from divorce attorney Howard Finch, who boasted 30 years of experience in high-asset divorces and a reputation for being meticulous and relentless. I handed him Malcolm's report, observing his eyebrows rise as he read it. Upon completion, he confirmed it was diligent work. My financial investigator exposed all secret accounts, money transfers, and tax inconsistencies. This is exactly the information we require. He outlined my choices. I could immediately confront Elaine, yet risk her concealing further assets or erasing evidence. I could initiate divorce proceedings, letting discovery expose everything, albeit slowly and at great cost. Or I could be patient, build more proof without her knowledge until our case was ironclad. I opted to wait. It wasn't simple. Each day, I returned home to a woman pretending to greet me warmly while she hid nearly $1 million of money she'd embezzled from our family. Every evening, I heard her grumble about expenses, all the while knowing she had just received a $156,000 bonus mere months prior. Every hour demanded I feign ignorance, but I endured. The more proof we compiled, the better my position would be. To make her experience the same emotions she inflicted upon me once the truth surfaced, I let those months pass. In this duration, I uncovered secrets about my spouse that I had remained unaware of. Malcolm's probe disclosed more than just financial dishonesty. The funds in Dohler's accounts were not static. Elaine collaborated with her mother to acquire real estate, specifically 2 rental properties in Florida, listed under Dohler but funded from concealed bonus money. These properties yielded income that neither of us declared in our tax returns, and it only grew worse. I also found out that Elaine was plotting to leave me. Emails between her and her mother, acquired through lawful discovery processes according to Howard, contained discussions about the best timing for the divorce. They were waiting until both children completed high school and Elaine vested her final stock options. They delayed until their real estate investments grew enough to establish her financial stability permanently, overturning every thought I had regarding our marriage. The woman I shared a life with had been meticulously devising an exit strategy for years, constructing a financial stronghold that would allow her to depart with all the assets while leaving me with nothing. The lack of anything paled in comparison to the pain I felt upon this revelation. The calculated, patient, systematic planning that was something else entirely. The confrontation unfolded in November. I wasn't prepared. I don't think one can ever be ready for something like this. However, circumstances compelled my action. Elaine's company announced a restructuring, and her department was being reduced in size. She was offered a severance package that included a $340,000 payout for her stock options. She returned home thrilled about it, discussing our potential trip to Italy we had long postponed. I became aware she intended to conceal that money, as she had done with previous funds. Fearing she would amass even more if I delayed, I contacted Howard. I informed him it was the right time. He promised he'd have the documents ready the next day, but I wasn't prepared for what followed. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning, nevertheless. A process server delivered the papers to Elaine at her workplace, along with an account of Malcolm's findings, and a statement that we were pursuing a forensic accounting of all marital assets. I was not home when this transpired. Instead, I was at my sister Audrey's house, having hastily packed 2 bags and departed while Elaine was at work. I told the children I had an urgent business matter and would clarify everything shortly. Parting from them was the most difficult part, leaving without knowing when I might see them again. The marriage had already ended when I read Malcolm's report, but that moment of filing for divorce was the hardest reality to face. Difficult was my departure from my children, even briefly, due to the anticipated turmoil ahead. My prediction of chaos proved accurate. Elaine initially reacted with denial, calling me 17 times in just 2 hours and leaving growingly anxious voicemails for explanations. She asserted the forensic report was falsified. She claimed I was experiencing a mental breakdown. She claimed she could clarify, thinking that if I returned home to discuss matters, I refrained from responding. Howard had advised me against engagement. He suggested letting her vent, as it would provide more evidence for later. Her subsequent response was rage. Via Audrey, friends in common, or anyone within reach, Elaine began disseminating a narrative. I was alleged to be paranoid, controlling, hiding money from her, an irony so deep I nearly chuckled at the absurdity when I heard it. She portrayed herself as the victim and me as the antagonist. Anyone who disagreed had been deceived by my deceit. In response number 3, she acted legally by hiring attorney Carolyn Draper, recognized for forceful strategies in divorce cases. In a matter of days, I was hit with countercharges of financial exploitation, mental coercion, and parental estrangement. As Howard explained, this was a typical strategy. When the proof is conclusive, the course of action is to discredit you. Don't let it unsettle you. We have evidence she has allegations. The months leading up to trial were harsh. There's no other term for it. Elaine challenged every motion, disputed every document, and sought depositions from Malcolm, Howard, and anyone who assisted in uncovering the truth. She claimed the forensic evidence was illegally acquired, that I had hacked her accounts, violated her privacy. None of it was valid, but dealing with it required time and money that I couldn't afford. During this period, our children were unwittingly caught in the crossfire. At 8, Chloe was puzzled by the situation, while Martin, aged 6, sought clarification as to why I wasn't residing at home anymore. Elaine manipulated their feelings, arranging activities during my custody time and portraying me as harsh towards her, distorting facts that painted me as the antagonist in their minds. I'm unsure how I managed during those challenging months. I worked, consulted with Howard, meticulously documented every instance of Elaine's actions during our temporary custody arrangement that went against the stipulations. During the limited time I spent with my children, I endeavored to be present and prepared for court. The hearing was set for May, not a full trial, but a preliminary one to handle the division of assets and outline the structure for the final proceedings. However, Howard had a plan. He told me we wouldn't litigate the affair or emotional infidelity, as judges dislike complexity. Instead, we would solely focus on the financial evidence. The figures were incriminating. Over the previous months, Malcolm's investigation uncovered a total of over $1 million in concealed assets when factoring in Florida real estate, brokerage accounts, and redirected severance money to Elaine's mother's accounts. However, the crucial evidence was tax fraud. Howard collaborated with the IRS to expose Elaine's underreporting of income, triggering a criminal investigation. Unaware of it so far, but soon to be informed, the IRS operates covertly. Contrasting my expectations, the courtroom was modest, characterized by fluorescent lights and plastic chairs, resembling a conference room rather than an imposing hall of justice. Upon arrival, Elaine was already present in the courtroom. At the defendant's table, she sat alongside Carolyn Draper, dressed conservatively in navy attire, displaying a look of injured innocence. Avoiding eye contact, I believed she was unable to do so. Judge Catherine Morneau arrived promptly at 9. In her 60s, she sported silver hair and reading glasses on her nose. Howard had shared that she held a reputation for impartiality and little patience for dramatic displays, which worked in our favor as we possessed evidence. Elaine began with opening statements. Carolyn Draper depicted a husband controlling and violating his wife's privacy to fabricate evidence for court destruction. Howard offered straightforward facts, figures, dates, account details, property records before Malcolm testified. I was familiar with Malcolm's report, having read it in its entirety multiple times. However, observing him present his evidence in the courtroom was unlike anything else. He methodically walked through 6 years of deceit, demonstrating an unfazed precision that suggested he had done this countless times before. The narrative began with 2018. Elaine received her first substantial bonus worth $78,000. Just 3 days later, a transfer of $75,000 was made to Dollars Thornton from her hidden account. He displayed the bank records and confirmation slips, followed by another bonus of $94,000 in 2019, also transferred to Dollars within a week, secretly evading joint tax returns and remaining unnoticed by me. In 2020, amidst the pandemic and Elaine's claims that bonuses were frozen, she received a bonus of $127,000, her largest yet, which was funneled to her mother's accounts, while she cautioned us about trimming our children's extracurricular activities. The pattern was so consistent it could only be attributed to deliberate actions. Later, Malcolm shifted focus to real estate matters. 2 properties in Florida, bought under Dollars, amounted to a total bonus price of $485,000. The down payments were $145,000, sourced from secret bonus accounts. The current estimated value is approximately $620,000. Side-by-side comparisons of Elaine's employer's reports versus our joint tax declarations exposed 6 years of unreported income totaling $891,247. Upon conclusion, the room fell silent. I finally glanced at Elaine since Malcolm began speaking. Her face had paled. Carolyn Draper attempted a cross-examination, yet it was evident she was struggling. She questioned Malcolm's methodology, but he explained his FBI background and the standard forensic techniques he followed. She raised doubts about the legality of his investigation. Howard presented signed authorization forms proving everything had been conducted lawfully. She contested the reasoning behind the evidence. Malcolm merely gestured towards the figures and inquired about a different interpretation. However, there was none to be found. The funds had transferred from Elaine's accounts to her mother's, unequivocally. Yet, the damaging revelation unfolded when Howard summoned his subsequent witness, an IRS criminal investigator named Thomas Hartley. I was unaware of this development. Howard intentionally concealed it, he admitted later, for the sake of plausible deniability. However, its impact was catastrophic. Agent Hartley testified that his department had initiated a criminal probe into Elaine Reeves and Dollars Thornton regarding tax fraud and potential money laundering. He testified that the undeclared income, coupled with unreported rental income from Florida properties, rendered this case federal. He testified that warrants for their arrest were being drafted. Elaine's demeanor crumbled. She grasped Carolyn's arm and whispered urgently. I didn't catch the spoken words, but the distress was palpable. Judge Morneau, with an expression that indicated she had encountered this before, observed the scene. After Agent Hartley concluded his testimony, Judge Morneau called for a short break. This pause lasted about half an hour. Throughout this interval, I remained seated, refrained from conversation, and merely absorbed the heaviness of it all. 6 long years, close to $1 million. A marriage constructed on unforeseen deceit, now disintegrating in a courtroom amidst federal agents, forensic analysts, and a judge who would determine the partitioning of the debris. Upon resumption, Carolyn Draper approached the bench and requested a private conversation with Judge Morneau and Howard. I watched as they spoke softly, unable to overhear their discussion, until Howard returned to our table and whispered quietly, "She wants to negotiate a settlement. Elaine is attempting to bypass criminal charges by proposing a comprehensive settlement." Upon questioning, he showed me a hastily drafted agreement during the break. The proposal includes Elaine relinquishing all claims to secret financial accounts, transferring property into a trust for our children's education, pleading guilty to 1 charge of tax fraud, and assisting the IRS investigation for leniency in sentencing. In this deal, I would gain full custody of the kids, with Elaine receiving supervised visitation. As part of the agreement, I would forgo civil litigation against Elaine and her mother regarding the concealed assets. Upon examining the document, I looked at Elaine, who remained seated at the defendant's table, continuing to avoid eye contact. "Accept it," I told her. After 2 more hours, Judge Morna reviewed the settlement, asked relevant questions, and compelled both parties to affirm their agreement on the record. When Elaine's chance to speak arrived, her voice cracked. "I accept," she managed, barely audible. In that courtroom, those were the only words I heard from her. Judge Morna enacted provisional rulings. Custody was granted to me instantly. Elaine would have monitored visitation every other weekend, subject to completion of court-ordered therapy. All concealed assets would be inventoried and dispersed in accordance with the agreement's terms. The IRS probe continued independently. At noon, it ended. I exited the courtroom into a radiant May daylight. Howard extended his hand and assured me he'd contact me about concluding documents. Malcolm acknowledged me from across the parking lot, a subtle recognition between two individuals who had experienced something neither could forget. I got in my car and drove to Audrey's house, where my children were anticipating me. I was uncertain how to convey what transpired. I found myself unsure of how to inform my 8- and 6-year-old children that their mother had been embezzling for years from our family. I was uncertain how to balance delivering the grim truth with providing them the comfort they required, yet I still made the journey there. Because they were my kids, and I knew they needed their father, which was one role I was familiar with. The subsequent events unfolded over several months. Elaine admitted guilt to a single count of tax evasion in federal court. The prosecutor suggested a reduced sentence based on her cooperation: 18 months probation, a $50,000 fine, and repayment of underpaid taxes with interest. It wasn't the retribution some felt she deserved, but it was a federal conviction that would be a constant reminder in her life. Dollars faced charges as an accomplice, and while her case took longer to resolve, eventually, she admitted guilt to 1 count of money laundering. The Florida properties were sold, and the earnings were deposited into their educational trust as previously agreed. She escaped prison due to her age and clean past, but the legal expenses depleted any remaining savings. Elaine lost her job at Wexford Industrial on the day of the trial, as the company terminated her for reasons including the damage to its reputation and the ongoing federal investigation. By last report, she was freelancing, earning far less than before. Our divorce concluded in August. I retained the house and custody. She took her personal items and whatever residual pride she could salvage from her decision's ruin. A year after that courtroom hearing, I penned this with a desire to convey something. The money had significance. Naturally, it did. Almost $1 million taken from my family over 6 years. It's not insignificant. That's the money meant for our children's education. That's the safety net we believed we were constructing together. That's years of my efforts spent on sacrifices that ultimately proved pointless. The money wasn't the primary act of deceit. The genuine betrayal was sharing meals with someone daily, only to hear lectures on fiscal prudence from them, witnessing them denying your children experiences due to caution, and realizing that every statement was falsehood. The real betrayal was experiencing my reality being eroded bit by a person who was meant to be my ally. I am unsure if I'll ever place such blind trust in someone again. I hope I will. My therapist suggests it's possible to regain trust after deception, stating that the failure of one relationship doesn't mean all relationships are destined to fail. I'm trying to believe her. However, I also understand this. For 10 years, I trusted Elaine, but she exploited that trust to swindle me. She utilized my faith in her to construct a secret life devoid of me and our children. She disguised her deceit behind the facade of love. This isn't something one easily recovers from. This isn't something one forgets. My offspring are surpassing my initial expectations, demonstrating resilience that adults occasionally overlook. Once, Chloe inquired why I had relocated, and I explained the situation as delicately as possible. Certain decisions I made weren't equitable for our family, resulting in us adapting to new ways. After a brief pause, she requested ice cream. Kids grasp more than we credit them with, yet they are adept at letting go when necessary. I am endeavoring to learn that from them. Martin does not pose questions. He merely seeks my presence upon waking and requires the stability of our routine. I ensure this. Each morning I'm present. Every night I'm present. No matter what transpires, my children recognize they can rely on me. If you find this situation resonating with you, if your partner appears evasive about finances, if the figures don't align, or if your instincts are raising concerns that your heart doesn't want to acknowledge, I empathize with you. Believe that you're not delusional. Rely on your intuition. Carry out investigations. If financially feasible, engage experts and don't let others invalidate your quest for truth about your own life. I endured 6 years within a deceptive marriage. For 6 years, I made concessions as my spouse crafted an exit strategy. For 6 years, I trusted in a partnership that existed merely in my mind. However, I also spent 18 months unveiling the truth and battling for justice. I invested 18 months in realizing my resilience. I discovered truth, however agonizing, was superior to the comforting fabrication I had been living. Betrayal's essence is it undermines what you perceive as genuine. Yet in the wreckage, you sometimes uncover something more valuable, the truth about your authentic self when all falls apart. Nathan Reeves, at 45, am a single father to 2 extraordinary children. I'm a victim of financial deceit and concealment, but now I've found freedom. A 2024 Bankrate poll might astonish you. Around 40% of Americans in romantic relationships have financially betrayed their partner through infidelity. Shockingly, this includes 23% hiding secret debt, 19% concealing a savings account, and 18% owning a credit card unbeknownst to their spouse. Staggeringly, nearly half of those surveyed consider financial dishonesty as damaging as physical infidelity. Therefore, one may question how truly honest are relationships.